Canada partners with China, the US left behind as the global oil game shifts. Canada's energy market transformation. Canada, with $176 billion Canadian dollars in energy exports, 97% of which traditionally went to the United States, is experiencing a significant shift. Amidst aggressive US trade policies and the imposition of a 10% tariff on oil and gas imports from Canada, China has strategically entered the Canadian energy market. A major Chinese oil refining company, Petrochemical, boasting a processing capacity of 800,000 barrels per day, has discreetly established operations in Calgary. Rapidly, it secured a crude oil supply agreement with Suncor, one of Canada's top energy corporations. Initial shipments are scheduled for departure to China starting June 2024. But this is only the beginning. Petrochemical is actively negotiating with other industry giants such as Cenovus, Shell, BP, and ConocoPhillips. Opting for free on-board (FOB) contracts, the company ensures flexibility in shipment destinations. Steering this strategy is Wang Jia, a seasoned expert who previously founded ProChina's energy trading division in the Canadian market. TMX, the infrastructure that changed everything. The Trans Mountain Expansion, TMX project, completed in early 2024, has redefined Canada's energy landscape, stretching nearly 1,200 kilometers and tripling capacity from 300,000 to 890,000 barrels per day. TMX enables Canadian crude to access Pacific ports directly, bypassing the US entirely. This development brings Canada closer to energy-hungry markets such as China, Japan, and South Korea, nations with refineries optimized for heavy sour crude. Previously, over 95% of Canadian oil exports were directed to the US, leaving Ottawa vulnerable to American policy shifts. TMX represents not just a transportation breakthrough, but economic liberation for Canada. In response to US-imposed tariffs, the Canadian government promptly deployed a support package worth 6.5 billion Canadian dollars, $5 billion allocated to assist businesses in reaching global markets, and $1 billion to bolster agriculture. Canadian enterprises, however, didn't wait for government action. With TMX operational, Petrochemical swiftly became a strategic buyer, expanding its interests beyond crude oil to liquefied natural gas, LNG. The second energy wave, LNG exports to Asia. The LNG Canada project in Kitimat, British Columbia, backed by Shell, ProChina, and Mitsubishi, is progressing steadily toward completion, with LNG exports anticipated to commence by the end of 2025. Currently, Canada exports nearly 8.6 billion cubic feet of natural gas daily, mostly to the US. But with new LNG terminals along the Pacific and even the Arctic coastlines, Canada is charting an independent course to global gas markets. Canada has officially shifted its energy game. No longer dependent on US markets, Canada is opening new gateways to Asia, transforming from a raw material supplier to a global energy player. With evolving infrastructure comes evolving strategy, and with new buyers, power dynamics shift. Canada is rising as a formidable competitor in the global energy arena. Michigan voters turn against Trump, a growing sense of betrayal. In a recent focus group conducted by Axios and Engage Sago, Michigan voters who once rallied behind Trump are now voicing deep disappointment and a sense of profound betrayal. What was once cautious optimism about economic revival and lower living costs has given way to stark realities: mass layoffs, skyrocketing prices, and a growing sense of administrative disorder. Voters lament that the country is unraveling in ways that surpass even their worst fears. Fueling much of this anger is the controversial role of Elon Musk within the administration. Many voters view his influence as both perplexing and illegitimate, accusing him of dismantling established systems with Trump's endorsement. Musk's presence in policymaking circles is seen not as a sign of innovation, but as an alarming overreach that accelerates institutional collapse. Expectations of affordable living have been thoroughly dashed. Rather than easing costs, tariffs and trade conflicts have triggered relentless price hikes, deepening financial strain. Compounding this, widespread job losses and brutal cuts to healthcare and social services have left even securely employed citizens feeling vulnerable, while state-dependent communities feel abandoned entirely. The political disconnect is stark. Michigan lawmakers aligned with Trump have largely vanished from public forums, leaving constituents to gather on their own, their leaders' seats ominously empty. The situation is especially dire for veterans, as understaffed and demoralized support centers struggle to function amid layoffs and uncertainty. Adding fuel to the fire, the administration's aggressive trade posture towards Canada has sparked protests across Detroit and Windsor. Citizens on both sides of the border are uniting in frustration, condemning the erosion of a crucial, time-tested alliance. Europe's historic turn, pursuing defense autonomy beyond the shadow of the United States. Europe is entering a decisive chapter in its pursuit of strategic autonomy, as the continent rallies nearly 800 billion euros under the ambitious Readiness 2030 program. This is far more than a substantial financial investment. It is a bold declaration of Europe's intent to reduce its long-standing reliance on U.S. military technologies. Growing concerns over possible kill switches hidden in American defense systems, mechanisms that could allow Washington to disable Allied equipment remotely, have sent shockwaves through European leadership circles. These revelations strike at the heart of national sovereignty, raising fears of external control over Europe's critical defense capabilities. Simultaneously, trust in Washington's security guarantees is visibly eroding. European officials, including Denmark's Defense Committee chairman, have openly warned of the risk that the U.S. might exploit its dominance in defense exports for geopolitical leverage. This fear is prompting a significant rethink of procurement strategies across the continent. Countries like France, Portugal, and even U.S. allies, such as Canada, are reconsidering their dependence on American fighter jets, like the F-35, and exploring homegrown or alternative solutions. This shift reflects a clear desire to build defense independence and reduce vulnerability to foreign pressures. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has underscored this urgency, candidly stating that Europe must prepare for a future without guaranteed U.S. support. Even Canada has taken steps to diversify, signing a multi-billion-dollar radar agreement with Australia, signaling that this pursuit of autonomy extends beyond Europe itself. At the same time, diplomatic tensions are rising, notably over U.S. activities in Greenland. Denmark's forceful response to unauthorized U.S. visits highlights smaller allies' growing unease with Washington's assertiveness in sensitive regions. Altogether, these developments reveal a Europe determined to redefine its role on the global stage, moving from dependency to leadership and from vulnerability to genuine strategic strength. Canada's retaliation. The trade war with the U.S. intensifies. On March 4th, Canada escalated its trade retaliation by imposing sweeping 25% tariffs on $155 billion worth of U.S. exports, including critical sectors like automobiles, energy, and steel. This decisive move is a direct response to Trump's aggressive tariff strategy and signals that Ottawa is prepared to match Washington's escalation. Point for point, the automotive sector is among the hardest hit. Automakers such as Tesla, Ford, and GM now face rising production costs, further straining already fragile supply chains. With nearly $700 billion in annual trade flowing between the US and Canada, these disruptions are having immediate, far-reaching consequences. Component shortages and delays are intensifying, threatening American manufacturing stability. Ontario, Canada's industrial powerhouse, has added a new layer of pressure by imposing a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the US. Officials have even warned of a full export suspension if hostilities deepen, a move that would directly jeopardize US energy security, particularly in border states. The impact extends to financial markets, with Canada's S&P/TSX index dropping 1.5%, while the Bank of Canada forecasts a potential 3% decline in GDP over the next 2 years if the trade conflict drags on. Meanwhile, Canada is waging an aggressive public relations campaign across 12 key U.S. states. By highlighting the domestic economic pain inflicted by the trade war, Canadian officials aim to influence American lawmakers ahead of the crucial election cycle, hoping to turn public sentiment against Trump's hardline policies. Mexico pushes back, defiance against Trump's tariffs. Escalating economic pushback. Mexico targets critical supply chains. Mexico is taking an assertive and uncompromising stance in response to escalating U.S. tariffs, threatening to disrupt essential supply chains that heavily intertwine the two economies. By targeting critical sectors such as automotive manufacturing and agriculture, Mexico is leveraging its position as a vital supplier of car parts and food products to the U.S. market. Should these countermeasures materialize, they could trigger sharp price hikes across American industries and consumer markets, adding fuel to existing inflationary pressures. This is far from symbolic retaliation. It represents a calculated move by Mexico to expose vulnerabilities within the U.S. economy, underlining the deep interdependence that Washington cannot afford to overlook. Mexico's strategic escalation signals a shift away from passive accommodation toward active resistance in the face of unilateral U.S. trade aggression. Firm rejection of U.S. migration demands. On another contentious front, Mexico is firmly rejecting Washington's attempts to outsource its border control responsibilities. Refusing to serve as a so-called humanitarian checkpoint, Mexican authorities have declined to act as gatekeepers to stem the flow of migrants headed toward the U.S. southern border. This defiance could have profound repercussions. As the 2020 U.S. election cycle intensifies, a potential humanitarian and political crisis looms along the border, amplifying domestic tensions in the United States. Mexico's refusal to shoulder this burden highlights the growing fatigue and frustration with American expectations that regional partners absorb the political fallout of U.S. immigration policies. Igniting a regional movement against U.S. hegemony. Perhaps even more significantly, Mexico's assertiveness is galvanizing a broader regional awakening across Latin America. Countries long wary of U.S. dominance, including Venezuela, Cuba, and Brazil, are drawing inspiration from Mexico's bold posture. These nations are seizing the moment to challenge Washington's entrenched influence, fostering an emerging coalition that seeks greater autonomy and regional solidarity. What is unfolding goes beyond isolated acts of resistance. It reflects a rising collective determination across Latin America to redefine its relationship with the United States. Mexico, by standing its ground, is not merely defending its own interests, but is also paving the way for a hemispheric recalibration of power dynamics. A transformative moment in U.S.-Latin America. Relations taken together. Mexico's escalating trade countermeasures, its uncompromising stance on migration, and its role in inspiring regional defiance mark a pivotal turning point in U.S.-Latin American relations. The era of unquestioned U.S. dominance is facing an unprecedented challenge from its southern neighbors, driven by a combination of economic leverage, political assertiveness, and regional solidarity. This evolving landscape signals that Latin America is no longer content to play a subordinate role in Washington's strategic calculus. Instead, it is charting a more independent path, with Mexico emerging as a central force in this historic transformation. China's counteroffensive, tariffs, and market domination. China is intensifying its trade retaliation against the U.S., striking directly at core sectors of the American economy. By drastically cutting imports of U.S. soybeans, corn, and pork, China is hitting American farmers where it hurts most. These agricultural exports have long been lifelines for rural economies, and the sharp decline in Chinese demand is deepening financial pain in regions already struggling with market volatility and climate challenges. This calculated move is more than economic. It's a strategic effort to amplify political pressure in key battleground states ahead of the 2025 U.S. elections. In parallel, China has imposed a 25% tariff on American-made vehicles, dealing a serious blow to automakers like Tesla, Ford, and GM. These companies are rapidly losing ground in China to domestic champions such as BYD and NIO, which enjoy strong government backing and lower production costs. This widening gap underscores Beijing's commitment to nurturing homegrown industries while diminishing the foothold of foreign competitors. Meanwhile, American consumers are bearing the brunt of escalating tariffs. Prices for electronics, food, and construction materials continue to climb, adding to inflationary pressures and household financial strain. At the same time, China is accelerating its technological rise. Backed by extensive subsidies, Chinese firms are dominating sectors like electric vehicles and green technology. As the world races toward a sustainable future, China is positioning itself as the leader of this transformation, turning trade conflict into an opportunity to strengthen its global influence. Altogether, these actions reveal a deliberate Chinese strategy to challenge U.S. economic dominance on multiple fronts, reshaping global power dynamics in the process. The U.S.-EU trade conflict: wine, whiskey, and tariffs. The trade standoff between the United States and the European Union is intensifying, with Trump threatening a steep 200% tariff on European wines and champagnes. This move is a direct retaliation against the EU's earlier tariffs on American whiskey, putting at risk Europe's $13.1 billion export market to the U.S. For European wine producers, such a tariff would be a heavy blow, threatening livelihoods and undermining a key pillar of their economy. European leaders have strongly pushed back, vowing to defend their wine industries and warning that these punitive measures could seriously damage long-standing U.S.-EU trade relations. They argue that escalating tariffs will only deepen divisions, harming both economies at a fragile time for global trade. Ironically, this dispute could create unexpected openings for U.S. winemakers. If European wines become too expensive in the American market, domestic producers might step in to fill the gap, potentially boosting their market share. Beyond wine and whiskey, this conflict reflects a broader trend of transatlantic trade tensions, where each escalation risks unraveling vital economic ties and complicating future cooperation between two major global powers. Trump's cycle of threats and retreats with Canada. Trump's unpredictable approach to trade with Canada, marked by sudden tariff threats and equally swift reversals, has sown deep uncertainty in the markets. These erratic maneuvers have rattled investors, amplified volatility, and cast doubt over the reliability of U.S. trade policy. For businesses on both sides of the border, the lack of clear direction has made long-term planning increasingly difficult. Canada, traditionally measured in its responses, has taken an uncharacteristically firm stance. In response to Trump's provocations, Ottawa has rolled out targeted tariffs, imposed bans, and actively promoted consumer boycotts against U.S. goods and tourism. The impact is already visible. Canadian travel to the United States has plunged by 40%, costing the American economy billions in lost revenue. Beyond immediate economic fallout, Trump's inconsistent policies are eroding confidence among U.S. exporters and raising costs for American consumers. Globally, these destabilizing tactics are damaging America's credibility. Controversial remarks about the U.S.-Canada border and chaotic trade rhetoric are feeding perceptions of unreliable U.S. leadership, straining alliances, and giving rise to questions about Washington's role as a stable economic partner.